The first time I saw humans fight, I thought they were broken. My name is Zektar, and I come from the Thraxian Empire, a civilization that has conquered 17 star systems through careful planning and overwhelming technological superiority. We are logical beings, standing 8 feet tall, with crystalline exoskeletons that can deflect most energy weapons. Our minds process information at speeds that would make organic computers jealous. We calculate odds, analyze weaknesses, and strike only when victory is mathematically certain. That's why the human request made no sense. I was serving as a military advisor on the neutral station Omega-7 when Ambassador Sarah Chun approached me. She was small, even by human standards, maybe 5.5 feet tall with graying hair and tired eyes. But there was something in the way she carried herself that made me pause my calculations. "Commander Zektar," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. "We need your help." The chaos she referred to was the approaching Devrak fleet. 300 warships, each one capable of glassing an entire planet. They had been sweeping through this sector for months, leaving nothing but debris and silence in their wake. The Devrak were known for two things: their absolute ruthlessness and their technology that could adapt to any weapon system after being hit by it 3 times. "The station will fall within 6 hours," I told her, my vocal cords producing the harmonic tones of my language translated through the universal communicator. "My calculations show a 0.3% chance of successful defense. Evacuation is the only logical choice." Sarah shook her head. "We can't evacuate. There are 40,000 civilians on this station, including 3,000 children. Our transport ships can only carry half that number, and we need 12 hours minimum to get everyone out safely. Then you will lose half your people," I replied with what I thought was helpful honesty. "It is better than losing all of them." The human's face changed then, and I saw something I had never witnessed before in any species we had conquered. Her features hardened, but not with fear or resignation. It was something else entirely. "No," she said simply. "We don't leave people behind. Ever." I tilted my crystalline head, confused. "But the mathematics clearly show—" "I don't care about your mathematics," Sarah interrupted. "Will you help us fight?" The request was absurd. Humans were fragile creatures made of soft flesh and brittle bones. Their technology was adequate, but nothing special. Their military tactics were often reckless and emotionally driven. By every logical measure, they should have been easy to conquer, yet somehow they had managed to forge an independent confederation of 12 worlds. "What can you possibly offer that would change the outcome?" I asked. Sarah's lips curved upward in what humans call a smile, though it looked more predatory than friendly. "Let me show you something." She led me through the station's corridors to the main hangar bay. What I saw there defied immediate analysis. Humans were working alongside dozens of other species, all preparing for battle. But these weren't professional soldiers. Most were civilians. Shop owners, engineers, teachers, families with children who should have been evacuating. "What is this?" I asked. "This," Sarah said, "is what humans do best." A young human male, barely past adolescence by their standards, was helping an elderly Centaurian grandmother into a maintenance exosuit. The suit was clearly too large for her, but he was patiently adjusting the controls and explaining how to operate the plasma torch mounted on the arm. "Mrs. Kellen taught my little sister how to read," the boy explained to me when I approached. "No way I'm letting those Devrak monsters hurt her." Mrs. Kellen's 6 eyes focused on me with surprising clarity. "Young Marcus here is going to help me weld shut the maintenance shafts on level 47. If those creatures want to reach the children in the shelters, they'll have to go through a few more barriers." I ran calculations on their plan. The maintenance shafts would slow Devrak borders by perhaps 12 minutes. Hardly significant in a battle that would likely last hours. "This will barely impact the outcome," I informed them. Marcus looked at me like I'd said something deeply stupid. "It's not about the outcome, Bugman. It's about doing what's right, Bookman." The casual insult should have triggered my military conditioning, but something about the way he said it, without malice, almost affectionately, made me reconsider. These humans were facing certain death, yet they seemed almost energized by the prospect of defying impossible odds. Sarah guided me to another section of the hangar where a group of humans were modifying cargo haulers into makeshift weapons platforms. The modifications were crude, but showed remarkable creativity. They had somehow managed to mount mining lasers and industrial cutting tools onto the vehicles, creating mobile gun platforms that could operate in the station's corridors. The DVRAC expect military resistance, a human engineer explained to me. She was covered in grease and had obviously been working for hours without rest. They'll come in with standard boarding protocols, looking for organized defense points and weapon emplacements. They won't expect a cargo hauler to come around the corner, shooting industrial-grade plasma cutters. The logic was sound, I had to admit. Unconventional tactics could provide temporary advantages, especially against an enemy that relied heavily on predictive algorithms. But this is still just delaying the inevitable. I pointed out, even if you successfully repel the first wave of boarders, they will adapt. The DVRAC always adapt. The engineer wiped her hands on a filthy cloth and looked at me with something I was beginning to recognize as a distinctly human expression. It wasn't exactly defiance, but it wasn't resignation either. "You know what your problem is?" she said. "You think this is about winning." Before I could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The DVRAC fleet had arrived early. I watched the tactical displays as 300 enemy ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Their vessels were dark, angular things that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Each ship was twice the size of anything the station's defenders could field, and their weapons had the power to crack a moon. The defending fleet was pitifully small in comparison. 18 ships total, 12 human vessels for Thraxian scouts, and 2 Centaurian research ships that had been hastily retrofitted with weapons. By any reasonable calculation, the battle would last perhaps 20 minutes before the defenders were completely annihilated. I expected to see panic among the station's inhabitants. Instead, I observed something that challenged my understanding of logical behavior. The humans became calmer. As the tactical situation grew more desperate, their movements became more purposeful. Their communications became clearer and more efficient. It was as if the approach of certain death had somehow focused their minds rather than scattered them. "All civilian ships, this is Admiral Torres," a voice crackled over the station's communication system. "You are cleared for immediate evacuation. Jump coordinates have been uploaded to your navigation systems." "Negative, Admiral," came the immediate response from the civilian transport captain. "We're staying to help with the evacuation of non-combatants." "Captain Morrison, you're a cargo hauler, not a warship," Admiral Torres replied, though I could hear approval in his voice rather than disapproval. "Yeah, well, my cargo hold can carry 200 people, and my engines are faster than anything else in this system. Figure that makes me useful." Similar conversations were happening throughout the fleet. Civilian vessels that should have been fleeing were instead moving closer to the station, offering whatever help they could provide. It made no tactical sense whatsoever. "This is not logical," I said to Sarah, who was coordinating the defense from the station's command center. "No," she agreed, "it's not logical. It's human." The DVRAC fleet began its advance, moving in the precise formations that had conquered dozens of worlds. Their ships spread out in a complex pattern designed to prevent any defending vessel from escaping while maintaining overlapping fields of fire that would eliminate any resistance. I computed their approach vectors, weapon ranges, and probable boarding strategies. The mathematics were elegantly brutal. The DVRAC would pound the defending fleet into scrap metal, then methodically board the station and execute every living being aboard. "Final evacuation numbers?" Sarah asked her aide. 22,000 evacuated so far. 18,000 still aboard. Sarah nodded grimly. They had managed to save more than half the civilian population, which was better than my original calculations had suggested. But 18,000 people were still going to die. "Admiral Torres reports the fleet is ready for engagement," another aide announced. Sarah keyed her communicator. "This is Omega-7 Control. You are authorized to engage the enemy." I watched the tactical display as 18 small dots began moving toward 300 larger ones. It looked like a group of insects attacking a herd of elephants. The first exchange of fire lit up space like a miniature star. The human ships moved in patterns that seemed random to my analysis programs, darting between the larger DVRAC vessels like small fish among sharks. Their weapons, while individually weak, were concentrated on single targets rather than spread across the enemy formation. To my surprise, the first DVRAC ship exploded. "Ow!" I asked, studying the tactical readouts. "Concentrated fire on their shield generators," Sarah explained. "Human ships are smaller and faster." They can coordinate strikes better than larger vessels. The celebration was short-lived. Even as the debris from the first Dvorak ship scattered across space, return fire from the enemy fleet began finding its targets. 2 human vessels disappeared in brilliant flashes of light, and a third began spinning helplessly as its engines failed. But the remaining ships didn't retreat. Instead, they pressed their attack, moving even closer to the enemy formation. It was tactically insane. At close range, the Dvorak ship's superior firepower would be even more devastating. What were they doing? I asked. Sarah's expression was grim, but somehow proud. They're buying us time. As if to emphasize her point, Captain Morrison's cargo hauler suddenly accelerated directly at the largest Dvorak ship. The enemy vessel's defensive fire tore through the hauler's hull, but Morrison kept his course steady. "This is Morrison to all ships." His voice crackled over the communicator, distorted by damage to his vessel. "Tell my kids their dad did something that mattered." The cargo hauler slammed into the Dvorak command ship's bridge section and exploded, taking out the enemy vessel's command and control systems. The massive ship began drifting, its remaining weapons firing randomly as damaged systems tried to maintain combat operations. I felt something I had never experienced before. My crystalline carapace began vibrating at frequencies that indicated extreme stress. Human scientists would probably call it fear, though my species had no word for such an illogical response to danger. The humans were dying to protect strangers. They were sacrificing their own lives for people they had never met, for children who weren't even their own species. It violated every principle of logical self-preservation that formed the foundation of Thraxian society. And yet, somehow it was working. The Dvorak fleet's advance had slowed as ship after ship was forced to deal with individual human vessels that fought like cornered predators. The precise formations that had dominated dozens of previous battles were beginning to break apart as captains were forced to maneuver independently to track targets that refused to behave predictably. "Station defense teams, prepare for boarding operations," Sarah announced. "Enemy troops will begin docking procedures in approximately 15 minutes. I found myself following Sarah and her team as they moved through the station's corridors. The areas that had been bustling with evacuation efforts were now eerily quiet, except for the distant sound of weapons fire echoing through the metal walls. We reached a major intersection where a group of humans had established a defensive position. They had overturned tables and furniture to create cover, and several were armed with military-grade pulse rifles. Others carried tools that had been modified into weapons: welding torches, plasma cutters, even construction equipment. Among them was Marcus, the young man I had met earlier. He was now wearing pieces of improvised armor and carrying what looked like a mining charge that had been rigged as an explosive device. "How long until they reach this section?" Sarah asked the defense team leader. "Probably 10 minutes, maybe less," the leader replied. "They've cut through the outer hull on level 32. We're tracking their movement through the maintenance sensors. Civilians, all evacuated from this section." Mrs. Kellen and her team finished sealing the maintenance shafts about 20 minutes ago. Sarah nodded approvingly, then turned to me. "Commander Zektar, you should evacuate with the next group. This isn't your fight." I should have agreed immediately. My ship was docked in a secure bay, and I could be off the station in minutes. My obligation was to return to the Thraxian Empire with intelligence about human military capabilities, not to die in a hopeless battle defending aliens. But something had changed in my thought processes. The mathematics that normally guided my decisions seemed inadequate to describe what I was witnessing. "I will stay," I heard myself say. Sarah looked surprised. "Why?" I attempted to analyze my motivations, but the usual logical frameworks provided no clear answer. "I'm not certain," I admitted, "but I believe I need to understand." "Understand what?" Before I could answer, the lights went out. Emergency illumination bathed the corridor in red light as the sounds of cutting tools echoed from nearby sections. The Dvorak had breached the station's hull and were beginning their systematic advance toward the civilian shelters. "Contact," someone whispered into their communicator. "Visual on Dvorak troops, level 31, Section C." I had seen Dvorak soldiers before during intelligence briefings. They stood 7 feet tall and wore powered armor that made them nearly invulnerable to small arms fire. Their weapons could punch through most offensive positions, and their tactical coordination was nearly perfect. 20 humans with improvised weapons and furniture for cover should have been slaughtered within minutes. What happened instead changed my understanding of warfare forever. The first DVRAC soldier rounded the corner and immediately came under fire from 3 different directions. The humans didn't waste ammunition trying to penetrate his armor. Instead, they targeted his sensors, his weapon systems, his mobility joints, anything that would impair his combat effectiveness. When the soldier raised his weapon to return fire, Marcus appeared from a side corridor and attached his improvised explosive to the DVRAC's back before disappearing back into the shadows. The explosion didn't kill the soldier, but it damaged his armor's power systems and threw him off balance. Before he could recover, 2 more humans hit him with plasma cutters, targeting the joints where his armor was weakest. The second and third DVRAC soldiers who followed met similar fates. The humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like predators, using the station's layout to their advantage, striking from unexpected angles, then disappearing before the enemy could respond effectively. "This is impossible," I said to Sarah, who was coordinating the defense from a makeshift command post. "What's impossible about it?" she asked, not looking away from her tactical display. "They should be dead. All of them. The DVRAC are superior in every measurable way." Sarah finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that my analysis systems couldn't categorize. "You're still thinking about this wrong. You're measuring the wrong things." "What do you mean?" "You're measuring weapons, armor, tactics," she said. "But you're not measuring what matters most." Before I could ask for clarification, her communicator crackled to life. "Defense Team 7 to command. We've lost contact with Teams 3 and 5. Enemy forces are advancing on multiple fronts." Sarah acknowledged the report, then turned back to me. "Commander, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." "What is it?" "Your people conquered 17 star systems. You must be excellent warriors." "We are efficient," I replied. "We calculate optimal strategies and execute them with precision." "But have you ever fought for something you believed in?" The question confused me. "We fight for the expansion and glory of the Thraxian Empire." "That's not what I mean," Sarah said. "Have you ever fought for something that you would die to protect? Not because it was logical or efficient, but because the thought of losing it was unbearable." I considered the question as weapons fire echoed through the corridors around us. "No," I admitted. "I have never fought for such reasons." Sarah smiled sadly. "Then, you've never really fought at all." The lights flickered as explosions shook the station. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear human voices shouting coordinates and status reports. They were losing ground, falling back section by section, but their voices carried no hint of despair. "Defense Team 12 to all units." A voice crackled over the communicator. "We've rigged the main power conduit on level 35. If they want to get to the shelters, they'll have to go through a very large explosion." "Acknowledged, Team 12, Sarah replied. "What's your evacuation plan?" There was a pause. "We don't have one, ma'am. Someone needs to trigger the charges manually." Another pause, longer this time. "Understood," Sarah said finally. "Make it count." I realized that the human defender was volunteering to die to slow the enemy advance by perhaps 30 minutes. It would make no difference in the ultimate outcome of the battle, but he was offering his life anyway. "This is irrational," I said. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "Completely irrational. And that's exactly why it works." The explosion from level 35 rattled the entire station. Emergency alerts flashed across Sarah's tactical display as primary power failed, and backup systems struggled to maintain life support. "Status report," Sarah requested. "Enemy advance halted temporarily," came the response. "They're regrouping to find alternate routes. Estimate 20-minute delay." 20 minutes. One human life had bought 20 minutes. I found myself calculating what that meant in practical terms. 20 minutes for the remaining civilian transports to load more evacuees. 20 minutes for the defense teams to reposition and prepare new ambushes. 20 minutes for the damaged ships in the fleet to conduct emergency repairs. For the first time, I began to understand that the humans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to buy time, to save lives, to ensure that something would survive even if they didn't. It wasn't logical. It wasn't efficient. It violated every principle of tactical warfare that I had been taught. But somehow, against all mathematical probability, it was working. The evacuation sirens have been silent for hours, but somehow that made everything feel more urgent rather than less. Sarah Chun looked at her tactical display with the expression I was beginning to recognize as distinctly human, a mixture of grim determination and impossible hope. Final count? She asked her aide. 37,000 evacuated. 3,000 remaining, including essential personnel and volunteers who refused to leave. 3,000. I processed the numbers with my typical Thraxian efficiency, but something about the mathematics felt different now. These weren't just casualty projections. They were individuals who had made the conscious choice to face death rather than abandon their posts. Admiral Torres reports the fleet has been reduced to 6 operational vessels, another aide announced. They're requesting permission to begin final evacuation runs. Sarah shook her head. Tell the Admiral to maintain his position. Every minute the fleet keeps the Divrak busy is another 100 civilians who make it to safety. I studied the tactical readouts streaming across her displays. The space battle had evolved into something that defied conventional military analysis. The remaining human ships weren't trying to defeat the Divrak fleet. They were dancing around it, striking at targets of opportunity, forcing the enemy to waste time and resources hunting individual vessels. Captain Rodriguez's destroyer had lost its main weapons but was still using its engines to ram Divrak fighters. The research vessel Curiosity had somehow managed to modify its sensor arrays into a jamming system that was disrupting enemy communications. Most remarkably, a civilian transport called Lucky Strike was using its cargo manipulator arms to grab Divrak torpedoes and fling them back at their launchers. This is not standard military doctrine, I observed. No, Sarah agreed, it's not. But then, again, humans aren't standard anything. As if summoned by her words, Marcus appeared in the command center. The young man who had been helping elderly aliens just hours ago was now covered in scorch marks and carrying a weapon that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts. Mrs. Kellen's section is secure, he reported. The barriers held, and we managed to collapse 2 major access corridors. But they're bringing in heavy cutting equipment. Maybe 30 minutes before they break through. Casualties? Sarah asked. 3 wounded, none serious. Tommy burned his hand on a plasma coupling, but Doc Martinez patched him up. Sarah nodded approvingly, but I could see the strain in her face. She was tracking dozens of similar reports from throughout the station, each one representing human lives risked to buy a few more minutes of time. Commander Zektar, she said, turning to me, you mentioned that your people have conquered 17 star systems. What was your standard protocol for planetary assault? I accessed my military training files. Orbital bombardment to eliminate defensive positions, followed by systematic occupation of key strategic points. Resistance is generally eliminated within the first 48 hours through overwhelming force. And the civilian populations. Those who surrender immediately are processed for relocation or integration into the Empire. Those who resist are eliminated as a security threat. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. How many civilians typically resist? Very few, I admitted. Most species understand that resistance is futile once our tactical superiority has been demonstrated. But humans wouldn't surrender, she said. It wasn't a question. I considered the evidence I had observed over the past several hours. Humans facing impossible odds, fighting with improvised weapons, sacrificing their lives for strangers. The pattern was clear. No, I agreed. Humans would not surrender. And that terrifies you, Sarah said with something that might have been sympathy. My carapace began vibrating again at frequencies I was learning to associate with what humans called fear. She was right. The implications of human behavior patterns were deeply disturbing to my understanding of logical conquest strategies. How do you defeat an enemy who refuses to surrender? How do you occupy a population that continues to resist, even when resistance is mathematically impossible? How do you maintain control over beings who value abstract concepts like freedom more than their own survival? The Divrak faced the same problem, I realized suddenly. Sarah smiled grimly. Exactly. They're designed to fight conventional militaries that behave in predictable ways. They've never encountered anything like this. Her communicator crackled to life. Command, this is Engineering Section 7. We've got movement in the primary power distribution center. Looks like they're trying to cut main power to the civilian shelters. Response team status? Sarah asked. Teams 4 and 9 are en route, but they won't arrive for at least 15 minutes. The DVRAC will have control of the power systems by then. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, and I could almost see her calculating options. None of them were good. I'll go, I said. Sarah opened her eyes and stared at me. What? The power distribution center, I clarified. I can reach it in 8 minutes through the maintenance shafts. My carapace can resist their weapons long enough to disrupt their operations. Why would you do that? It was a reasonable question, and one I was still trying to answer for myself. My original mission was to observe human military capabilities and report back to the Thraxian Empire. Dying in a doomed battle served no logical purpose. But something had changed in my thought processes since arriving on this station. The mathematical certainties that had guided my entire existence were being challenged by what I was witnessing. I need to understand, I said finally. Understand what? What you are willing to die for. Sarah studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Take Marcus with you. He knows the station layout better than anyone. Marcus looked up from where he was checking his improvised weapon. I'm ready. No, I said. This is not his responsibility. The young human laughed, though there was no humor in it. None of this is anyone's responsibility. That's the point. I didn't understand his meaning, but there was no time to ask for clarification. According to my calculations, the DVRAC would have control of the power systems within 12 minutes. If the shelter's life support failed, 300 children would die of suffocation before the enemy troops ever reached them. The maintenance shafts were barely large enough for my crystalline frame, but Marcus moved through them with the casual efficiency of someone who had spent years crawling through the station's infrastructure. We had to pause twice to avoid DVRAC patrols that were advancing through the main corridors. There, Marcus whispered, pointing to a grating that opened into the power distribution center. Through the metal slats, I could see 6 DVRAC soldiers working systematically to disconnect the primary power feeds to the civilian sections. Their movements were precise and efficient. They would complete their task in perhaps 5 minutes. What's the plan? Marcus asked. I analyzed the tactical situation. 6 enemies in powered armor, armed with military-grade weapons, operating in an open space with minimal cover. We had the advantage of surprise, but that would last perhaps 30 seconds once we engaged. There is no plan, I admitted. Only necessity. Marcus nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Sound about right. On your signal. I removed the grating as quietly as possible and prepared to drop into the chamber below. My carapace was tough enough to absorb significant damage, but the DVRAC weapons could eventually penetrate it. Marcus's human flesh would offer no protection at all. You should stay here, I told him. There is no logical reason for you to risk. Stop trying to apply logic to this, Marcus interrupted. Logic is what got the galaxy into this mess. Sometimes you just have to do what's right, even when it makes no sense. I still didn't understand, but there was no more time for analysis. I dropped through the opening into the power distribution center. The first DVRAC soldier was so focused on his task that he didn't notice me until my crystalline claws raked across his helmet's sensor array. Sparks flew as his visual systems failed, and he stumbled backward, firing blindly. Marcus dropped through the opening behind me and immediately rolled behind a power coupling for cover. His improvised weapon, which I now realized was some kind of magnetic pulse device, discharged with a sound like thunder, and 2 of the DVRAC soldiers' weapons simply stopped functioning. The remaining 3 DVRAC soldiers turned their attention to us, and the chamber erupted in weapons fire. Energy bolts ricocheted off my carapace as I charged the nearest enemy, but I could feel the crystalline structure beginning to crack under the sustained assault. Marcus was moving constantly, using his smaller size to dart between the massive power distribution units while taking shots at exposed joints in the DVRAC armor. His tactics were completely improvised. No formal training, no standardized procedures, but they were working. Behind you, he shouted. I spun just in time to block a DVRAC combat blade with my forearm. The weapon was designed to cut through starship hulls, and it carved a deep groove in my carapace before I managed to grab the soldier's wrist and twist until his armor's joints failed. The soldier dropped his weapon, but instead of retreating, he activated some kind of close combat system. Spikes emerged from his gauntlets as he lunged at me with renewed aggression. I had trained for combat against other Thraxians, against conventional military forces, against enemies who followed predictable tactical doctrines. I had never trained to fight beside someone who was willing to die to protect strangers. Marcus appeared beside the DVRAC soldier, and simply pressed his magnetic pulse weapon against the enemy's power pack. The discharge overloaded the armor's systems instantly, and the soldier collapsed as his suit lost power. To left, Marcus announced, reloading his weapon with components from his equipment belt. The remaining DVRAC soldiers had taken cover behind the primary power coupling and were working to complete their mission while maintaining defensive fire. One was almost finished disconnecting the shelter's life support systems. "I will distract them," I said. "You must prevent them from cutting the power feeds." "That's suicide," Marcus pointed out calmly. "They'll tear you apart." "Yes," I agreed. "But you might succeed." Marcus looked at me with an expression I couldn't interpret. "You really don't get it, do you?" Before I could ask what he meant, he threw something across the chamber, a small device that began emitting a high-pitched whine. The DVRAC soldiers immediately focused their fire on it, assuming it was a grenade. It wasn't. It was a distraction. While the enemy was shooting at empty air, Marcus and I attacked from opposite sides. My claws found gaps in the first soldier's armor, while Marcus used his pulse weapon to disable the second soldier's systems. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of power distribution units and the distant sound of weapons fire from other parts of the station. "Power feeds secure," Marcus announced, checking the primary controls. "Life support to the shelters is stable." I was leaning against a wall, breathing heavily and examining the damage to my carapace. Several sections were cracked, and one arm was barely functional. By any reasonable standard, I should have been dead. "How?" I asked. "How what? How do we succeed?" The tactical situation was impossible. 6 enemies in superior armor with superior weapons in a defensible position. We should have failed. Marcus was quiet for a moment, making adjustments to the power distribution controls to ensure the DVRAC couldn't easily repeat their sabotage attempt. "You want to know the secret?" he said finally. "Yes. We didn't fight to win. We fought because giving up wasn't an option." I processed this statement through every analytical framework I possessed, but it still made no sense. "But the outcome is the same regardless of motivation." "No," Marcus said firmly. "It's not the same at all." He gestured toward the disabled DVRAC soldiers. They fought to complete an objective. They had backup plans, fallback positions, acceptable loss parameters. They were professionals doing a job. And we were not professionals. We were people protecting our families, Marcus said. "When you're fighting for something that matters more than your own life, you don't calculate odds or plan for retreat. You just keep going until you can't anymore." Something in his words triggered a new understanding in my thought processes. The humans weren't succeeding despite their illogical tactics. They were succeeding because of them. The DVRAC were designed to fight armies that behaved predictably, that followed established military doctrines, that surrendered when defeat became mathematically certain. They were not prepared for enemies who refused to accept defeat, even when it was inevitable. My communicator crackled to life. "All stations, this is Admiral Torres. Enemy fleet is beginning to withdraw. Repeat, the DVRAC fleet is withdrawing from the system." Marcus and I looked at each other in amazement. "They're leaving?" I asked, not quite believing what I had heard. "Sounds like it," Marcus replied, a grin spreading across his face. "But why?" "They have superior numbers, superior firepower. Victory is still mathematically certain." Marcus laughed, actually laughed, as weapons fire continued to echo through the station corridors. "That's the thing about math. It only works if everyone agrees to follow the same rules." Over the next hour, reports began flooding in from throughout the station. The DVRAC boarding parties were withdrawing to their ships. The massive fleet that had arrived with such overwhelming force was preparing to jump back into hyperspace. I listened to the reports with growing confusion. "This makes no sense," I said to Sarah when we regrouped in the command center. "They could still win. The casualties they've taken are minimal compared to their total force." Sarah was coordinating the final stages of the civilian evacuation, but she paused to answer my question. "They could win," she agreed. "But at what cost?" "Cost is irrelevant if victory is achieved." "Is it?" Sarah asked. "The DVRAC have been conquering worlds for decades through overwhelming force and systematic intimidation. Their entire strategy depends on enemies surrendering quickly once their superiority is demonstrated." I began to understand. But humans did not surrender. And neither did any of the other species on this station, Sarah pointed out. Thraxians working alongside Centaurians, humans fighting beside Krellans, everyone united in defending people they'd never met before today. She gestured toward the tactical displays, showing the mixed species evacuation fleets. The Divrak aren't just fighting humans anymore. They're fighting an idea, and ideas are much harder to kill than armies. As if to emphasize her point, a message arrived from the Divrak fleet commander. It was brief and to the point. This system is not worth the resources required for conquest. We withdraw. They're afraid, I realized suddenly. Not afraid of dying, Sarah corrected. Afraid of what would happen if word spread about a successful resistance. Afraid of what other worlds might do if they knew that the Divrak could be fought. The implications sent vibrations through my carapace that registered as pure terror. If humans could inspire other species to resist, if the idea of defying impossible odds could spread from world to world, the entire structure of galactic civilization could change. Empires that had maintained control through demonstrations of overwhelming force would find themselves facing populations that refused to surrender. Conquest would become exponentially more difficult and resource-intensive. Your species has just changed the nature of warfare itself, I told Sarah. Maybe, she replied. Or maybe we've just reminded everyone what it was supposed to be about in the first place. Over the following days, as the station's population slowly returned to normal and repair crews worked to fix the damage, I found myself observing human behavior with increasing fascination. They didn't celebrate their victory with the triumphant demonstrations I would have expected. Instead, they held quiet ceremonies to honor those who had died, helped rebuild damaged sections, and went back to their ordinary lives as if facing impossible odds was just another day at work. Marcus returned to his job as a maintenance technician. Mrs. Kellen went back to teaching children how to read. The engineer who had modified the cargo haulers resumed her work on civilian infrastructure projects. Don't you understand what you've accomplished? I asked Marcus when I encountered him working on a damaged environmental control system. He looked up from his work and shrugged. We saved some people. That's what you're supposed to do. But the larger implications— Look, Commander, Marcus interrupted. I don't know anything about implications or galactic politics or whatever. I just know that Mrs. Kellen taught my sister to read, and Captain Morrison helped my family when we first arrived on this station. When people like that are in trouble, you help them. It's not complicated, but it was complicated, at least for me. Everything I had been taught about military strategy, about the nature of power, about the logical foundations of civilization, had been challenged by what I had witnessed on this station. Humans fought not because they were ordered to fight, but because they chose to fight. They risked their lives not for strategic objectives or territorial gain, but for abstract concepts like protecting the innocent and refusing to abandon their friends. They succeeded not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through sheer, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. It was illogical. It was inefficient. It violated every principle of rational warfare. And it worked. As my repair ship prepared to depart Omega-7, I stood in the observation deck looking out at the space where one of the largest battles in recent galactic history had taken place. There was little evidence of the conflict now, just some scattered debris and a few memorial beacons marking where brave souls had made their final sacrifice. Sarah joined me at the observation window. What will you tell your superiors when you return? She asked. I had been considering this question for days. My orders were to report on human military capabilities and recommend strategies for potential conquest. The logical response would be to advise that humans represented a significant threat that should be eliminated before they could spread their influence to other species. But that wasn't the whole truth. I will tell them that humans cannot be conquered, I said finally. Sarah looked surprised. Because we're too strong militarily? No, I replied. Because you cannot conquer people who refuse to be conquered. You can kill them, but you cannot make them surrender their humanity. I paused, trying to find words for concepts my language had no terms for. My species has built an empire through logical superiority and efficient conquest. We believed that overwhelming force would always triumph over inferior resistance. But we never considered what would happen if the resistance refused to accept its own inferiority. Sarah smiled sadly. And now you're afraid that other species might learn from our example. Terrified, I admitted, if the idea of resistance spreads, if other worlds begin to fight as humans fight, the age of empire ends, Sarah finished. I nodded. The mathematics were clear, even if the implications were troubling. Empires based on conquest and intimidation could only survive as long as their subject populations accepted their own powerlessness. Humans had just demonstrated that such acceptance was not inevitable. Your superiors won't like that message, Sarah observed. No, I agreed. They will not. What will you do? I looked out at the memorial beacons, thinking of Captain Morrison and the volunteer who had triggered the explosive charges and all the others who had died to protect people they barely knew. I will deliver my report accurately and completely, I said, and then I believe I will need to make some very difficult decisions about my own future. As my ship departed Omega 7, I carried with me something I had never possessed before: doubt. Doubt about the righteousness of the Thraxian Empire, doubt about the wisdom of conquest as a way of life, doubt about whether logical superiority was truly superior at all. But along with the doubt came something else, something I was only beginning to understand. Hope. Hope that perhaps the galaxy didn't have to be divided between conquerors and conquered. Hope that different species could work together as I'd seen them do on the station. Hope that strength might be measured not by the ability to dominate others, but by the willingness to protect them. It was an illogical hope, one that violated everything I'd been taught about the nature of power and survival. But then, again, I was learning that the most important things in the universe were often the most illogical ones. The journey back to Thraxian space took 14 standard days, and I spent every moment of it trying to prepare a report that wouldn't result in my immediate execution for treason. The facts were simple enough to present. Humans possessed average technology, adequate military training, and minimal strategic resources. By every conventional measure, they should have been easily conquered by any major galactic power. The Devrak fleet had withdrawn not because of human military superiority, but because the cost of occupation had become unacceptable. But how do you explain to a civilization built on logical conquest that an enemy had become unconquerable by refusing to accept logical defeat? My ship's computer chimed softly as we dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Thraxian home system. The crystalline spires of Thrax Prime gleamed in the light of our twin suns. Their perfectly geometric forms a testament to 10,000 years of ordered civilization. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, but I found myself seeing it with different eyes. The mathematical precision that had once filled me with pride now seemed somehow cold, lacking something I couldn't quite define. Within hours of my arrival, I received a summons to report to the High Command. This was expected. My mission had been classified at the highest levels, and the military council would want a comprehensive briefing immediately. The council chamber was a marvel of crystalline engineering, its walls designed to amplify harmonic frequencies and create perfect acoustic clarity. 7 figures sat in perfect symmetry around the chamber, their carapaces gleaming under the precisely calculated lighting. At the center sat High Commander Vexen, whose tactical brilliance had been responsible for the conquest of 6 star systems. To his right sat Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday, whose mathematical models had predicted the fall of every enemy we had faced in the past century. Commander Zektar, High Commander Vexen's harmonic voice resonated through the chamber. Present your findings on human military capabilities. I activated my tactical display and began with the raw data. Ship classifications, weapon yields, defensive capabilities, population centers, industrial capacity. The numbers painted a clear picture of a species that posed minimal threat to the Thraxian Empire. Conclusion. Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday asked. This was the moment I had been dreading. I could lie, present a sanitized version that would conform to their expectations, and ensure my continued survival. Or I could tell the truth and risk everything. I chose truth. Humans cannot be conquered, I said simply. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the harmonic resonance of the chamber's crystalline walls. Explain, High Commander Vexen commanded, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. Their military capabilities are limited, I continued, but their psychological resilience is unprecedented. They refuse to surrender even when defeat is mathematically certain. They fight not for logical objectives, but for abstract concepts they call honor, loyalty, and protection of the innocent. Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday activated his personal analysis display. You observed one isolated incident. Sample size is insufficient for broad conclusions. The sample size was not one incident, I corrected. It was hundreds of individual decisions made by humans across all levels of their society. Children, elderly, civilians with no military training. All chose to risk death rather than abandon their principles. Principles, scoffed Battle Coordinator Thylex. Emotional irrationality. A weakness to be exploited, not feared. I believe the same thing, I admitted, until I fought beside them. This admission caused another wave of silence. A Thraxian warrior fighting alongside aliens, especially humans, was almost inconceivable. You compromise your mission by engaging in combat. High Commander Vexen's voice carried the harmonic patterns of extreme displeasure. I defended a power distribution center to prevent the execution of 300 human children. I made this choice despite knowing it served no logical purpose. Why? The question was simple, but the answer was infinitely complex. How do you explain to a civilization that had never experienced emotion that you had acted from compassion? How do you describe courage to beings who had never needed to overcome their own fear? I do not know, I said finally. The decision violated my training, my orders, and my logical framework for decision-making. But in that moment, allowing those children to die was unacceptable. Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday's display filled with calculations. You experienced a temporary malfunction in your logical processes. Exposure to human irrationality created a contamination effect. This is treatable. It was not a malfunction, I said firmly. It was understanding. Understanding of what? That our entire philosophy of conquest is based on a flawed premise. The harmonic resonance in the chamber shifted to patterns I had never heard before: shock, anger, and something that might have been fear. High Commander Vexen stood, his crystalline form towering over me. You will clarify this statement immediately. I activated my personal display and showed them the tactical analysis I had prepared during my return journey. Our conquest strategies assume that subject populations will surrender when presented with overwhelming force. This assumption is based on logical self-preservation instincts that we share with most galactic species. The display showed conquest timelines for all 17 systems the Thraxian Empire controlled. In each case, organized resistance had collapsed within days once our technological superiority became apparent. But humans do not operate according to these logical parameters, I continued. They will fight impossible battles, sacrifice their lives for strangers, and inspire other species to similar acts of defiance. A human-controlled system cannot be conquered through conventional means. Then, we apply unconventional means, Battle Coordinator Thylex declared. Orbital bombardment, biological warfare, complete extermination if necessary. To what end? I asked. If we destroy human worlds, we gain nothing but empty planets and the enmity of every species that witnessed our actions. If we attempt occupation, we face decades of insurgency that will drain our resources and destabilize our empire. Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday was running calculations on his display, his harmonic frequencies indicating deep concentration. Your analysis suggests that contact with humans represents an existential threat to imperial expansion. Yes, I agreed, but not in the way you think. I changed my display to show population analysis data from the other species on Omega 7 Station. During the battle, I observed Centaurians, Krellans, and even Thraxian civilians fighting alongside humans. The human refusal to surrender inspired other species to similar acts of resistance. Contamination, Battle Coordinator Thylex concluded. The human psychological defect is spreading to other species. Or perhaps, I suggested carefully, other species are remembering capabilities they possessed before they were conquered. This statement caused an immediate cascade of harmonic alarm frequencies throughout the chamber. The implication was clear. If human behavior could inspire resistance in subject populations, the stability of the entire empire was threatened. High Commander Vexen resumed his seat, his carapace reflecting the chamber's lights in patterns that indicated deep thought. Present your recommendations. This was the most dangerous moment of the entire briefing. My recommendations could determine not only my own fate, but the future of human-Thraxian relations. The Thraxian Empire has 3 options, I said. First, immediate military action to eliminate the human threat before their influence spreads further. Acceptable, Battle Coordinator Thylex declared immediately. Second, I continued, complete avoidance of human space and prohibition of contact with human influence systems. A defensive posture, Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday observed. Logically sound, but limiting to expansion goals. Third, I said, knowing this would be the most controversial option, negotiated coexistence and potential alliance. The harmonic frequencies in the chamber reached levels that would have been painful to human ears. Several council members stood simultaneously, their carapaces vibrating with agitation. Alliance with humans? High Commander Vexen's voice carried overtones of disbelief. You suggest the Thraxian Empire ally with a species that threatens our fundamental principles of order. I suggest that our fundamental principles may be inadequate for the challenges we now face, I replied. Explain. I took what humans would call a deep breath, knowing that my next words would either change everything or end my existence. The galaxy is changing. The Devrak withdrawal from Omega-7 will not go unnoticed. Other conquest-based civilizations will observe that a determined defense can succeed against overwhelming odds. Subject populations will begin to question why they accepted defeat. My display showed projections of potential resistance movements across known space. Within a decade, we may face coordinated uprisings on multiple worlds. Our forces are designed for quick conquest, not sustained occupation against hostile populations. Then, we increase our military capacity, Battle Coordinator Thylex suggested. To what degree? I asked. How many ships, how many soldiers, how many resources would be required to maintain control over 17 systems filled with populations that refuse to surrender? The mathematics are clear. Such an effort would bankrupt the Empire within a generation. Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday was running increasingly complex calculations, his display flickering with data streams. Preliminary analysis confirms resource requirements would exceed sustainable levels if resistance movements achieve coordination. But humans offer an alternative model, I continued. They have created a confederation of 12 worlds, not through conquest, but through voluntary association. Their member species fight to defend each other rather than being forced to serve. Weakness, Battle Coordinator Thylex declared. Unity based on emotion rather than logical superiority. Is it weakness, I asked, when that unity inspires beings to fight against impossible odds and achieve victory? When individual civilians become more dangerous than professional soldiers because they believe in what they're protecting? High Commander Vexen raised his hand for silence. You experienced this phenomenon personally. Describe the effect on your own combat effectiveness. I accessed the memory files from the Power Distribution Center battle. I fought with capabilities I did not know I possessed. My tactical analysis systems were augmented by what humans call intuition. I made decisions based not on calculated probability of success, but on absolute determination to protect those who could not protect themselves. And the result? 6 enemy soldiers in superior armor were defeated by 2 individuals with improvised weapons and obsolete equipment. The tactical impossibility was overcome through what humans call fighting for something that matters. The council fell silent as they processed this information. I could see them running calculations, analyzing threat assessments, trying to quantify something that couldn't be reduced to mathematical formulas. Your recommendation for alliance, High Commander Vexen said finally. What specific form would this take? I had spent days preparing for this question. A mutual defense pact, initially. The Thraxian Empire provides technological advancement and strategic coordination. The Human Confederation provides resistance to conquest-based civilizations and cultural exchange that could strengthen both our peoples. Cultural exchange, Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday repeated. What benefit would this provide? Humans have developed capabilities we lack, I explained. Creative problem-solving, emotional resilience, the ability to inspire others to exceed their apparent limitations. These are not weaknesses to be eliminated, but strengths to be learned. And in return, Thraxian logic, technological advancement, and strategic planning could help humans avoid the resource conflicts that limit their expansion. Together, we could create something neither species could achieve alone. Battle Coordinator Thylex activated his combat analysis systems. This proposal assumes humans would accept alliance with a species that has conquered others. Their psychological profiles suggest strong negative reactions to what they call injustice. True, I admitted. Any alliance would require significant changes to imperial policy regarding subject populations. You suggest we release conquered worlds? High Commander Vexen asked. I suggest we offer them the choice to remain as voluntary partners rather than occupied territories. Those who choose to leave would be free to do so. Those who remain would do so as equals rather than subjects. The harmonic frequencies in the chamber reached levels that indicated extreme agitation. What I was proposing wasn't just alliance with humans. It was fundamental transformation of the Thraxian Empire itself. This proposal would end our civilization as it has existed for millennia, Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday observed. Yes, I agreed. But the alternative may be the end of our civilization entirely. I activated a final display showing my long-term projections. Human influence is already spreading. The Omega-7 incident will inspire resistance movements throughout the galaxy. Within 50 years, conquest-based empires will face coordinated opposition from dozens of species. The age of easy expansion is ending whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. But if we ally with humans now, if we become part of the solution rather than part of the problem, we can shape the future instead of being destroyed by it. High Commander Vexen stood and walked to the chamber's central display, studying my projections with the careful attention he had once given to invasion plans. The decision you describe, he said slowly, would require unanimous consent from the High Council and approval from the Emperor himself. Understand, it would mean abandoning everything that has defined Thraxian culture for centuries. Perhaps, I replied, or perhaps it means finally discovering what Thraxian culture could become. He turned back to face me, his carapace reflecting the chamber's lights in patterns I couldn't interpret. You will remain in isolation while the Council considers your recommendations. Contact with other Thraxians is prohibited until our deliberations are complete. I had expected this. My ideas were too radical, too dangerous to be allowed to spread until a decision had been made at the highest levels. One final question, Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday said. If the Council rejects your recommendations and orders immediate military action against human space, what would be your response? This was the question I had been dreading most. They were asking whether I would remain loyal to the Empire or to the principles I had learned from humans. I would request reassignment to non-combat duties, I said finally. And if such reassignment were denied, I met his gaze directly. Then I would be forced to choose between my oath to the Empire and my oath to protect the innocent. The silence that followed was complete. Everyone in the chamber understood the implications of my words. Dismissed, High Commander Vexen said quietly. As I left the council chamber, I knew that my life and possibly the future of galactic civilization hung in the balance. The next few days would determine whether the Thraxian Empire would evolve into something new or whether it would begin a war that could destroy everything humans and their allies were trying to build. In my isolation chambers, I found myself thinking about Marcus and Mrs. Kellen, about Captain Morrison and all the others who had chosen to fight for principles rather than survival. They had faced impossible odds with courage I was still trying to understand. Now it was my turn to face an impossible situation with whatever courage I could find. The difference was that I was no longer facing it alone. Somewhere in human space, billions of beings were building something new, a civilization based not on conquest and domination, but on voluntary cooperation and mutual defense. Whether I lived to see it or not, that civilization would survive. Humans had taught the galaxy that some things were worth dying for, and once that lesson was learned, it could never be unlearned. The Age of Empire was ending. The question was whether the Thraxian Empire would end with it or transform itself into something worthy of the future humans were creating. I settled into my isolation chambers and began to wait for an answer that would determine the fate of worlds. 7 days passed in the isolation chambers before I received word that the High Council had reached a decision. During that time, I had replayed every moment of the Omega-7 battle, trying to understand not just what had happened, but why it mattered so much. The summons came at dawn, delivered by a junior officer whose harmonic frequencies betrayed nothing about the Council's deliberations. I was escorted through corridors I had walked countless times before, but everything felt different now. The mathematical precision of Thraxian architecture seemed somehow sterile compared to the chaotic functionality of the human station. The council chamber was fuller than before. In addition to the 7 members of the High Military Council, representatives from the Scientific Directorate, the Resource Allocation Bureau, and the Cultural Preservation Institute had been called to hear the decision. Most significantly, a holographic presence indicated that Emperor Kethvar himself was observing the proceedings. High Commander Vexen's posture as I entered told me everything I needed to know. His carapace was positioned in the formal stance reserved for the delivery of imperial judgments. Whatever decision had been reached, it would be final and binding. Commander Zektar, he began, his harmonic voice carrying the weight of imperial authority, the Council has thoroughly reviewed your report and recommendations. I remained at attention, knowing that any response would be inappropriate until specifically requested. Your tactical analysis of human military capabilities has been verified through intelligence sources and is deemed accurate. Your psychological assessment of human resistance patterns has been corroborated by historical data from other contact incidents. A pause. In the silence, I could hear the subtle harmonic patterns of the Council members breathing, indicating elevated stress levels. However, High Commander Vexen continued, your recommendations for fundamental changes to Imperial policy have generated significant debate. Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday activated his display, showing the results of extensive mathematical modeling. Projected outcomes for military action against human space indicate acceptable probability of tactical success. Estimated timeline for complete conquest, 6 months to 18 months, depending on resistance levels. Projected outcomes for defensive isolation show minimal risk to existing Imperial territories. Added resource allocation, Representative Melvan. Economic impact would be negligible. But, High Commander Vexen said, and that single word carried implications that made my carapace vibrate with tension. Your third recommendation has been deemed worthy of further consideration. I struggled to maintain composure as the implications of this statement processed through my mind. They were actually considering alliance with humans. The Emperor has authorized a limited diplomatic initiative, High Commander Vexen announced. You will return to human space as a special envoy with authority to negotiate preliminary terms for what they call a mutual defense agreement. The harmonic shock in the chamber was palpable. Several representatives began generating protest frequencies, but the Emperor's presence prevented any vocal objections. Conditions, High Commander Vexen continued. First, negotiations are to be conducted in absolute secrecy. No other Imperial citizens are to be informed of these discussions until authorized by the High Council. Second, any agreement reached will be subject to Imperial ratification. The humans will be informed that preliminary terms may be modified or rejected entirely. Third, you will be accompanied by a diplomatic team with authority to terminate negotiations immediately if human demands prove unreasonable. Fourth, and here his voice carried dangerous undertones, failure to achieve satisfactory terms within 60 standard days will result in implementation of Military Option Alpha, immediate conquest of all human territories. I absorbed these conditions with growing understanding of the impossible position I was being placed in. The Council was giving me a chance to prove my theory, but with limitations that virtually guaranteed failure. I accept these conditions, I said formally. Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday stepped forward. You should understand that opinion within the Council remains divided. Many believe that negotiating with humans from a position of equality rather than superiority is itself a dangerous precedent. I understand. Furthermore, added Cultural Preservation Representative Vorthe, any alliance that requires significant changes to Imperial structure will face strong resistance from traditional factions. The humans would need to offer extraordinary incentives to overcome such opposition. I nodded acknowledgement, though privately I wondered what incentives could possibly be sufficient. The Thraxian Empire had been built on principles of logical superiority and ordered expansion. Asking it to accept voluntary cooperation was like asking water to flow uphill. Your diplomatic team will consist of strategic analyst Quextal, cultural observer Renthin, and military liaison Brektar, High Commander Vexen announced. They have been briefed on the mission parameters. As he spoke, 3 Thraxians entered the chamber. I recognized Quextal from previous operations, a brilliant analyst whose mathematical models had predicted enemy behavior with remarkable accuracy. The other 2 were unknown to me, but their bearings suggested extensive diplomatic experience. Departure is scheduled for 0800 tomorrow, High Commander Vexen concluded. You will proceed directly to human space and request audience with their highest diplomatic authorities. Sir, I ventured, what initial terms am I authorized to offer? None, he replied bluntly. Your authorization extends only to listening and reporting. Any substantive negotiations will require communication with this council. I felt my carapace vibrating with frequencies that indicated extreme stress. They were sending me to negotiate an alliance while denying me any real negotiating authority. It was a setup designed to fail while providing political cover for harder-line factions. Dismissed, High Commander Vexen said. As I left the council chamber with my assigned team, strategic analyst Quexdal fell into step beside me. This mission is doomed to fail, she said quietly in the harmonic frequencies reserved for private communication. Probably, I agreed. Then, why did you accept it? I considered her question as we walked through the crystalline corridors of the government complex. Because the alternative is guaranteed to fail. Military Liaison Brektar joined our conversation. Explain your reasoning. If we attack human space, we might achieve tactical victory, I said. But the cost will destabilize the Empire and inspire resistance movements throughout our territories. If we do nothing, human influence will spread anyway, and we'll face coordinated opposition within a decade. And if we negotiate? Cultural observer Renthan asked. Then we have a chance, however small, to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. The journey to human space took 8 days, during which my team conducted extensive briefings on diplomatic protocols and negotiation strategies. None of them had observed human behavior directly, so their preparations were based on theoretical analysis rather than practical experience. Humans respond poorly to displays of superiority, strategic analyst Quexdal noted, reading from her cultural assessment files. They appear to value what they call equality in diplomatic exchanges. Illogical, military liaison Brektar observed. Negotiations should reflect actual power relationships. That's exactly the kind of thinking that will destroy this mission before it begins, I warned. Humans don't negotiate based on power relationships. They negotiate based on principles. Cultural observer Renthin looked confused. What is the difference? Power relationships assume that the stronger party dictates terms to the weaker party, I explained. Principle-based negotiation assumes that both parties have legitimate interests that must be balanced. But we are objectively stronger than humans in every measurable category, strategic analyst Quexdal pointed out. Are we? I asked. They just forced the Devrak Empire to withdraw from a conquest they should have easily completed. They've inspired multiple species to resist imperial authority. Their influence is spreading faster than our military can contain it. Those are temporary tactical advantages, military liaison Brektar insisted. In a sustained conflict, logical superiority would prevail. I realized that my team was trapped in the same thinking that had dominated the Council's deliberations. They could analyze human capabilities intellectually, but they couldn't understand human nature experientially. Let me ask you something, I said. What would happen if the Thraxian Empire faced a choice between surrendering to preserve lives or fighting to the death to maintain our principles? We would calculate the optimal outcome based on resource conservation and long-term strategic objectives. Strategic analyst Quexner replied immediately. Exactly. We would surrender if it was logical to surrender, regardless of how we felt about it. Humans won't. You're saying they're psychologically incapable of logical decision-making? Cultural observer Renthan asked. I'm saying they're capable of decisions that transcend pure logic. Sometimes that makes them less effective, but sometimes it makes them incredibly powerful. We dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of human territory, near a monitoring station that served as the first contact point for diplomatic missions. The response to our request for audience came within hours. Ambassador Sarah Chun would meet with us personally. The location chosen for our meeting was revealing in itself. Rather than a formal diplomatic facility or military installation, we were invited to meet at a civilian research station called New Horizons. The message was clear. Humans wanted to establish that this was a conversation between equals, not a negotiation between conqueror and conquered. New Horizons was unlike any space station I had encountered. Instead of the efficient geometric designs favored by most civilizations, it had grown organically over decades, with new sections added as needed without regard for aesthetic uniformity. It looked chaotic, but as we docked, I could see that the apparent randomness masked sophisticated functionality. Ambassador Chun met us personally at the docking bay, accompanied by a small group of advisors representing various human departments. She looked older than when I had first met her, but her eyes carried the same determined intelligence. Commander Zektar, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome back. I accepted her handshake, noting that my team members observed this interaction with obvious discomfort. Physical contact during first meetings was not part of Thraxian diplomatic protocol. Ambassador Chun, I replied. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. May I present Strategic Analyst Quextau, Cultural Observer Rinthin, and Military Liaison Brektar. Each member of my team performed the formal Thraxian greeting, a complex harmonic sequence that indicated rank, status, and diplomatic authority. Ambassador Chun listened respectfully, though I suspected the subtleties were lost on her. Please, she said, follow me to the conference center. We have much to discuss. The conference room was another study in controlled chaos. Instead of formal seating arrangements, comfortable chairs were positioned around a circular table with holographic displays available from every angle. The walls were covered with charts, star maps, and what appeared to be children's artwork, a detail that I found both puzzling and oddly touching. Before we begin formal discussions, Ambassador Chun said once everyone was seated, I want to thank you personally for your actions during the Omega-7 incident. My team members looked at me with expressions I couldn't interpret. Clearly, my report to the High Council had not included every detail of my involvement. Your assistance saved lives, Ambassador Chun continued. That matters to us more than diplomatic protocol. Strategic Analyst Quextau activated her recording systems. Ambassador, we appreciate your acknowledgement of Commander Zektar's actions. However, we should clarify that he was acting as an individual rather than as a representative of imperial policy. Of course, Ambassador Chun replied smoothly. But individual actions often reflect underlying values, don't they? The fact that a Thraxian warrior chose to protect human children tells us something important about the possibility of cooperation between our peoples. Cultural observer Rinthin leaned forward. What exactly are human expectations for this diplomatic exchange? Ambassador Chun smiled. We hope to establish a foundation for mutual understanding and cooperation. Humans believe that different species can work together for common benefit without one dominating the other. And what specific benefits would humans offer to the Thraxian Empire? Military Liaison Brektar asked. That depends on what the Thraxian Empire values, Ambassador Chun replied. Security? Technological advancement? Economic growth? Cultural exchange? All of these are possible through cooperation. Strategic Analyst Quextau began running calculations on her personal display. Please be more specific. What tangible resources or capabilities would humans contribute to an alliance? Ambassador Chun's expression grew thoughtful. Let me answer that with a question of my own. What does the Thraxian Empire fear most? The question caught my team off guard. Thraxians didn't typically think in terms of fear. We assess threats and calculated responses. We do not operate from fear-based decision-making. Cultural observer Rinthin replied stiffly. Everyone fears something, Ambassador Chun said gently. Individuals, societies, empires. The question is whether we're honest enough to acknowledge it. I found myself answering before I could calculate the diplomatic implications. We fear irrelevance. My team members stared at me, their harmonic frequencies indicating shock and my unexpected candor. Explain, Ambassador Chun said. The Thraxian Empire was built on the premise of logical superiority. We conquered others because we could demonstrate that our methods were more efficient, our technology more advanced, our strategies more effective. But humans have shown that logic alone isn't enough. You've inspired other species to resist conquest, to value abstract concepts over practical survival. If that continues, our entire civilization becomes irrelevant. Ambassador Chun nodded thoughtfully. So, you're afraid that the galaxy is changing in ways that make your strengths less important? Yes, I admitted, ignoring the harmonic protest from my team. Then, here's what humans can offer, Ambassador Chun said. We can help you adapt to the changing galaxy instead of being destroyed by it. She activated the room's main display, showing a map of known space with current political boundaries. The age of conquest is ending, whether anyone wants it to end or not. Species are becoming more resistant to domination, more willing to cooperate with each other for mutual defense. Empires that can't adapt to this new reality will face continuous insurgency and eventual collapse. The display shifted to show projected conflict zones based on resistance movements and independence movements throughout the galaxy. But empires that can transform themselves into voluntary associations will thrive in the new environment. They'll have access to resources and capabilities that pure conquest could never provide. Strategic Analyst Quextau studied the projections intently. You're suggesting that cooperation is more efficient than domination? In the current galactic environment, yes, Ambassador, Chen replied. Let me show you something. The display changed to show resource allocation data from human space. The Human Confederation consists of 12 worlds with voluntary membership. Each world contributes according to its capabilities and receives support according to its needs. Our combined military effectiveness is greater than the sum of our individual parts because every ship, every soldier, every citizen fights with complete commitment. Compare that to traditional imperial models, she continued, bringing up data from various conquest-based civilizations. Occupied worlds require constant military presence to prevent rebellion. Resources must be diverted to maintain control rather than productive development. Military effectiveness is limited because subject populations provide only reluctant cooperation at best. Military liaison Brektar activated his own analysis systems. Initial review suggests these efficiency claims merit further investigation. There's more, Ambassador Chen said. In a voluntary association, technological advancement accelerates because different species contribute unique perspectives and capabilities. Cultural exchange generates innovation that pure research cannot achieve. She gestured toward the children's artwork on the walls. Those drawings were made by young beings from 6 different species, all working together on a joint project to design new propulsion systems. Their combined creativity has already generated 3 breakthroughs that our adult scientists missed. Cultural observer Ren Thin examined the artwork with obvious confusion. Children are contributing to propulsion research. Children ask different questions than adults, Ambassador Chen explained. They haven't learned yet that certain things are impossible. Sometimes that leads to discoveries that change everything. I found myself thinking about Marcus and his improvised weapons, about Mrs. Kellen welding maintenance shafts, about ordinary civilians becoming extraordinary defenders when the situation demanded it. Human society seemed designed to unlock capabilities that more rigid systems couldn't access. This is all very interesting in theory, strategic analyst Quexdow said diplomatically, but what specific terms would you propose for a mutual defense agreement? Ambassador Chen exchanged glances with her advisors. Before we discuss terms, we need to address a fundamental question. Is the Thraxian Empire prepared to treat alliance partners as equals rather than subjects? The question struck at the heart of everything that made this negotiation nearly impossible. My team members fell silent, their harmonic frequencies indicating deep uncertainty. That would require significant changes to imperial structure and policy, cultural observer Renthanersorin said carefully. We understand, Ambassador Chen replied. We're not asking you to abandon your civilization. We're asking whether you're willing to evolve it. And if we're not, military liaison Brektar asked. Ambassador Chen's expression grew serious. Then, this conversation ends here, and both our civilizations prepare for the consequences. Consequences? Strategic analyst Quexdow queried. The Thraxian Empire continues its conquest-based expansion until it encounters species that refuse to surrender. The resulting conflicts drain imperial resources and destabilize conquered territories. Within a generation, you're facing rebellions on multiple worlds and coordinated resistance from free species. The display showed her projections for this scenario. Decades of increasingly costly warfare culminating in imperial collapse or transformation into something unrecognizable. Alternatively, she continued, bringing up different projections, the Thraxian Empire evolves into a voluntary confederation. Former subjects become partners. Imperial knowledge and capabilities are enhanced by diverse perspectives and voluntary cooperation. The resulting alliance becomes stronger than any pure conquest could achieve. I studied both sets of projections, running my own calculations to verify her mathematics. The logical conclusion was clear. Cooperation was indeed more efficient than domination in the current galactic environment. But logic alone wouldn't be enough to convince the High Council. What specific guarantees could humans provide to ensure imperial security during such a transition? I asked. Joint defense against external threats. Ambassador Chen replied immediately. Technological sharing to enhance imperial capabilities. Economic cooperation to offset any temporary reduction in tributary income. And, most importantly, proof that the new model works through successful implementation. Strategic analyst Quextal was recording everything, but I could see her harmonic patterns indicating skepticism. These guarantees would require humans to commit significant resources to protecting Thraxian interests. Why would you accept such obligations? Because stable peace benefits everyone, Ambassador Chen said simply. Because diversity makes us all stronger. And because the alternative is a galaxy torn apart by endless warfare. She paused, then added with a slight smile, and because Commander Zektar risked his life to protect human children. That tells us the foundation for trust already exists. Military liaison Brektar activated his tactical analysis systems. Assuming theoretical acceptance of these principles, what would be the proposed timeline for implementation? Gradual transition over a period of years, Ambassador Chen replied. We understand that change of this magnitude cannot happen overnight. We would begin with joint operations against common threats, expand to technological and cultural exchange, and eventually move toward full integration into a galactic confederation of free worlds. And if some imperial territories chose independence rather than confederation membership, cultural observer Rinth_and asked, then they would be free to go, Ambassador Chen said without hesitation. Voluntary association only works if it's actually voluntary. This statement caused visible distress among my team members. The idea of simply allowing conquered worlds to leave the Empire violated every principle of imperial policy. You would assist in the dissolution of the Thraxian Empire? Strategic analyst Quextal asked. We would assist in its transformation into something better, Ambassador Chen corrected. Something that could survive and thrive in the changing galaxy. I realized that we had reached the crux of the entire negotiation. Humans weren't offering to preserve the Thraxian Empire as it existed. They were offering to help it become something entirely new. I need to communicate these proposals to the High Council, I said formally. Of course, Ambassador Chen agreed. But before you do, I'd like you to see something. She led us through the station to an observation deck that looked out into space. In the distance, I could see ships from dozens of different species working together on what appeared to be a massive construction project. What is that? Cultural observer Rinth_and asked. The first truly integrated research facility in galactic history, Ambassador Chen replied. Scientists, engineers, and philosophers from 37 different species, all working together to solve common challenges. As I watched, I could see the controlled chaos that seemed to characterize all human endeavors. Ships moved in patterns that looked random, but somehow coordinated perfectly. Construction proceeded without apparent overall plan, yet clearly followed some underlying logic. It shouldn't work, strategic analyst Quex_Al observed. But it does, Ambassador Chen said. And the results exceed anything any single species could have achieved alone. She turned to face us directly. This is what we're offering, Commander Zektar. Not conquest or submission, but participation in something larger than any of us individually. I stared out at the construction project, thinking about the choice facing my civilization. We could continue trying to impose our logical superiority on an increasingly resistant galaxy, or we could learn to become part of something that transcended logic itself. The High Council will want specific terms, I said finally. Then, let's draft them, Ambassador Chen replied. Over the next 3 days, we worked to translate grand concepts into practical proposals. The document we produced was unlike any diplomatic agreement in galactic history. Instead of the usual terms of submission or tribute, it outlined a framework for voluntary cooperation based on mutual benefit and shared responsibility. The humans proposed joint military operations against common threats, with command structures based on expertise rather than species affiliation. They offered technological sharing that would enhance Thraxian capabilities while gaining access to our analytical and strategic planning methods. Most importantly, they proposed a gradual transition period during which imperial territories could choose their own futures, remaining with a transformed confederation, joining the human alliance, or pursuing complete independence. As I prepared to return to Thraxian space with these proposals, Ambassador Chen pulled me aside for a private conversation. You know they'll reject most of these terms, she said. Probably, I agreed. And you know that failure to reach an agreement will likely lead to military action against human space? Yes. She studied my face with the intensity one had observed during the Omega-7 crisis. So why are you doing this? I considered her question, accessing memories of everything I had experienced since that first encounter with humans. Because even if we fail, someone will remember that we tried. And maybe that will matter someday. Ambassador, Chun smiled sadly. You're beginning to think like a human. Is that a good thing? Ask me again after you've survived the next council meeting. As my ship departed human space, I carried with me more than just diplomatic proposals. I carried the memory of seeing 37 species working together on a project that would benefit them all, the knowledge that cooperation could indeed be more powerful than conquest, and the hope that my own people might be wise enough to choose evolution over extinction. The journey back to Thraxian space would take 8 days. I suspected they would be the last peaceful days I would experience for quite some time. The emergency session of the High Council convened within hours of my return to Thrax Prime. Word of the diplomatic proposals had somehow leaked despite classification protocols, and the crystalline corridors of the government complex hummed with harmonic frequencies that indicated empire-wide agitation. I stood before the assembled council with my diplomatic team, carrying data crystals that contained the most revolutionary proposals in Thraxian history. The chamber itself seemed different somehow. The perfect geometric forms that had once inspired me with their mathematical precision now felt cold and rigid compared to the organic functionality I had witnessed in human space. High Commander Vexen's posture indicated extreme displeasure as he accessed the preliminary reports. Commander Zektar, your summary transmission suggests that humans have proposed the voluntary dissolution of the Thraxian Empire. Not dissolution, I corrected carefully. Transformation into a voluntary confederation based on mutual benefit rather than conquest. The harmonic shock that rippled through the chamber reached frequencies that would have shattered normal crystalline structures. Several council members stood simultaneously, their carapaces vibrating with agitation. Transformation, repeated Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday with tones that indicated profound disbelief. You speak of abandoning 10 millennia of imperial tradition. I speak of adapting to ensure our civilization's survival, I replied. Emperor Kethvar's holographic presence activated, his image materializing at the chamber's center. This was unprecedented. The Emperor rarely participated directly in council deliberations, preferring to observe and issue decisions through intermediaries. Present the human proposals in detail, his harmonic voice commanded. I activated the chamber's central display and began outlining the framework Ambassador Chen's team had developed. Joint military operations, technological sharing, gradual transition of imperial territories to voluntary association, and ultimate integration into a galactic confederation of free worlds. With each proposal, the harmonic discord in the chamber increased. By the time I reached the section on territorial autonomy, several council members were generating frequencies associated with rage. Impossible, declared Battle Coordinator Thylex. These terms would end the Empire in everything but name. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but the alternative may be the end of the Empire in fact, as well as name. Cultural Preservation Representative Vorth A.K. stepped forward. Explain this statement. I changed the display to show the intelligence analyses I had prepared during the return journey. Human influence is spreading faster than our ability to contain it. Resistance movements are forming on 17 different worlds, including 3 within our own territories. The intelligence was damning. On Kepler 7, Centaurian dock workers had organized work slowdowns in solidarity with human-inspired resistance. On Thrax 4, our own colonial population was questioning imperial policies for the first time in centuries. Most troubling, 3 Thraxian military units had filed formal requests for reassignment rather than participate in operations against human-allied worlds. The human psychological defect is spreading through contact and communication. Or perhaps, I suggested, beings throughout the galaxy are remembering what it means to choose their own destiny. Emperor Kethvar's holographic form moved closer to the display. Your assessment. Can this human influence be contained through conventional means? I had spent days analyzing this question, running calculations through every strategic framework I could access. The answer was mathematically clear, even if politically unacceptable. No, Your Excellency. Human ideas cannot be conquered because they exist in the realm of consciousness rather than physical space. Every attempt to suppress them through force validates their core message that resistance is possible. Then, you recommend surrender to human demands? Battle Coordinator Thylex asked with harmonic undertones of contempt. I recommend recognition of changed circumstances and adaptation of our strategies accordingly. Strategic Analyst Quexdal activated her personal display. During our negotiations, I conducted extensive probability analyses. If the Empire continues current policies, estimated time until critical system failure is 47 years with 73% confidence. And if we accept human proposals? Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday asked. Impossible to calculate with existing models, Quexdal admitted. The variables involved transcend conventional analytical frameworks. Cultural observer Rinth_in stepped forward. I observed significant anomalies in human social organization that merit consideration. She activated her own display, showing footage from the New Horizons station. Humans achieve coordination levels that exceed mathematical prediction. Individual initiative combines with collective purpose in ways that generate capabilities beyond the sum of their individual parts. Explain, Emperor Ketvar commanded. During our visit, I witnessed a maintenance crisis that threatened station integrity. The human response involved no centralized command structure, no detailed planning protocols, no assigned responsibilities. Yet within minutes, beings from multiple species had organized themselves into effective repair teams and resolved the crisis. She paused, her harmonic frequencies indicating confusion about her own observations. By every logical measure, their approach should have resulted in chaos and failure. Instead, it achieved success with greater efficiency than our own methods would have provided. Military liaison Brektar added his own observations. Human military doctrine appears to be based on principles that contradict established tactical theory. They achieve victory through acceptance of impossible odds rather than calculation of probable outcomes. The council fell into deliberative silence as they processed these reports. I could see them struggling with concepts that challenged the fundamental assumptions of Thraxian civilization. The humans have issued an ultimatum, Emperor Kethvar asked. No ultimatum, Europea. But they have made clear that rejection of alliance proposals will result in expanded support for resistance movements throughout Imperial space. A threat, Battle Coordinator Thylex concluded. A statement of consequence, I corrected. Humans appear to believe they have moral obligations that transcend diplomatic convenience. High Commander Vexen activated the chamber's strategic display, showing current Imperial military dispositions. Assessment. Can we achieve decisive military victory against human forces before resistance movements achieve critical mass? I studied the tactical projections, applying everything I had learned about human behavior. The mathematics were clear, but they told only part of the story. Tactical victory is probable, I said carefully. Strategic victory is impossible. Clarify. We can conquer human worlds, destroy human fleets, occupy human territories. But we cannot defeat the idea that beings have the right to choose their own destiny. That idea will survive any military defeat and continue spreading until it destroys us. Emperor Kethvar's image flickered as he processed secure communications from other parts of the Empire. When his attention returned to the Council, his harmonic patterns indicated deep concern. Intelligence reports confirm resistance activities on 12 Imperial worlds, he announced. 3 colonial governors have requested emergency military support to maintain order. The implications were staggering. The Thraxian Empire had maintained internal stability for centuries through logical administration and efficient resource allocation. The emergence of organized resistance within our own territories indicated fundamental systemic failure. Recommendation. Emperor Kethvar asked directly. This was the moment I had been preparing for since my first encounter with humans. Everything that followed would depend on whether I could find words to express concepts my language had no terms for. Your Excellency, I have observed humans fight against impossible odds and achieve victory through sheer refusal to accept defeat. I have seen them inspire other species to similar acts of courage and defiance. Most importantly, I have experienced what it means to fight for principles that transcend logical calculation. I paused, accessing memories of the Omega-7 battle, of children's artwork decorating research stations, of 37 species working together on projects that benefited them all. The galaxy is changing, Your Excellency. The age of conquest is ending whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. We can cling to outdated methods and watch our empire crumble, or we can adapt and become part of something greater than we could ever achieve alone. You advocate surrender, Strategic Coordinator Kel Thursday stated. I advocate evolution, I replied. Humans are not offering to conquer us. They're offering to help us become what we could be instead of what we've always been. Emperor Kethvar was silent for long moments, his holographic form motionless as he conducted private consultations with advisors throughout the empire. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of imperial destiny. The proposal will be put to a vote of the full council. Representatives from all imperial territories will be summoned to participate in deliberations. This was unprecedented. The full council had not convened in over 3 centuries, and never to consider fundamental changes to imperial structure. Timeline, High Commander Vexen asked. 30 days, Emperor Kethvar replied. Representatives will be transported to Thrax Prime with all necessary speed. As the emergency session concluded, I realized that the next month would determine whether the Thraxian Empire would evolve into something new or commit itself to a war that could destroy galactic civilization. The weeks that followed were unlike anything in Thraxian history. Representatives from 17 star systems arrived with mandates from populations that had never before been asked their opinions on imperial policy. The harmonic chaos in the capital was unprecedented, as beings who had lived their entire lives under centralized authority suddenly found themselves required to make decisions about their collective future. I was called to brief dozens of different groups, each representing different worlds, different perspectives, different visions of what Thraxian civilization could become. Some were horrified by the prospect of voluntary association. Others were intrigued by possibilities they had never imagined. Most surprising were the representatives from conquered territories. Many came prepared to argue for independence, but after reviewing the Human Alliance proposals, several began advocating for voluntary confederation instead. Why? I asked Representative Mextal from the Kepler system during one particularly intense briefing session. Because, she replied in harmonics I had never heard from subject population. For the first time since conquest, we have been asked what we want rather than told what we must accept. 3 days before the full council vote, I received an unexpected message from human space. Ambassador Chen requested permission to address the assembled representatives personally. The request created immediate controversy. No non-Thraxian had ever addressed the full council, and many representatives saw the proposal as an unacceptable breach of imperial dignity. Emperor Kethvar, however, authorized the communication. Ambassador Chen's holographic image appeared in the council chamber as representatives from throughout the empire watched in silence. Honored representatives of the Thraxian Empire, she began. I come before you not as a conqueror or supplicant, but as someone who has seen what your species can become when it chooses cooperation over domination. She activated a display showing footage from the Omega-7 battle. Commander Zektar fought beside humans to protect innocent beings from certain death. In that moment, he demonstrated capabilities that pure logic could never achieve. The footage shifted to show Thraxian civilians working alongside other species during the station's reconstruction. These beings chose to help strangers not because they were ordered to do so, but because they recognized a common purpose that transcended species boundaries. This is what we offer, Ambassador Chen continued. Not the abandonment of Thraxian capabilities, but their enhancement through voluntary cooperation with beings who share your commitment to order, progress, and the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. She paused, looking directly into the recording device. You fear that accepting our proposals will end your civilization. I tell you that refusing them will destroy not only your civilization, but the hope of peace throughout the galaxy. Choose evolution, she concluded. Choose to become part of something greater than conquest, stronger than domination, and more enduring than empire. The vote took place at dawn on the 30th day. Representatives filed into the great assembly chamber in order of seniority, their harmonic frequencies creating a complex symphony of uncertainty, hope, fear, and determination. Emperor Kethvar cast the final vote after all others had been recorded. The result was announced through harmonic proclamation that echoed throughout the crystalline structures of Thrax Prime. By a margin of 3 votes, the Thraxian Empire chose evolution over extinction. The transformation began immediately. Within days, Joint military operations commenced against pirate fleets that had been terrorizing trade routes in neutral space. Thraxian strategic planning combined with human tactical innovation achieved results that neither species could have managed independently. Technological exchange programs established laboratories on 17 worlds where beings from dozens of species worked together on projects that would benefit all participants. Cultural exchange brought Thraxian logic to human intuition, while human creativity enhanced Thraxian analytical capabilities. Most importantly, the gradual transition of imperial territories to voluntary association proceeded peacefully. Some worlds chose independence. Some joined expanded confederation structures, and others maintained traditional relationships with Thrax Prime while gaining autonomy over local governance. I found myself assigned to the new integrated command structure, working alongside officers from 12 different species to coordinate defensive operations throughout Confederation space. It was chaos by Thraxian standards, no rigid hierarchy, no standardized procedures, no guaranteed logical outcomes. It was also the most effective military organization I had ever experienced. 6 months after the vote, I stood on the observation deck of the Joint Headquarters Station, looking out at a fleet that would have been impossible under the old Imperial model. Thraxian analytical ships worked alongside human fast attack vessels, Centaurian research platforms, and Krellan defensive monitors. Each species contributed its unique capabilities to collective missions that protected civilians throughout known space. Marcus appeared beside me, now wearing the uniform of the Confederation Engineering Corps. "Still trying to figure out how it all works?" he asked with the casual humor I had learned to appreciate. "Every day," I admitted. "The variables involved exceed computational analysis." "That's the point," he said, grinning. "Sometimes the best solutions can't be calculated. They have to be felt." I watched a group of young beings from 6 different species working together to repair a damaged sensor array. Their methods were improvised, their coordination informal, their success probabilistically impossible. "I'm beginning to understand," I said. "Understanding what?" I thought about everything that had changed since that first encounter at Omega-7 Station. The fear I had experienced watching humans fight impossible odds. The courage I had discovered in myself when fighting beside them. The hope I now felt watching different species build something together that none could achieve alone. "What it means to fight for something worth fighting for," I said finally. Marcus nodded approvingly. "Now you're thinking like a human. Is that still a good thing?" "Ask me again after the next impossible battle," he replied. I looked out at the fleet of ships representing the first truly integrated galactic civilization in history. Somewhere among them, beings who had once been enemies were learning to become allies. Worlds that had been conquered were choosing cooperation. Empires built on domination were transforming themselves into something unprecedented. It was illogical. It was inefficient. It violated every principle of traditional governance. And it was working. The fear I had felt during my first battle beside humans had evolved into something I was only beginning to understand. Not the paralyzing terror of facing inevitable defeat, but the energizing awareness that some things were worth any sacrifice to protect. The age of empire was ending, just as I had predicted. But in its place, something better was being born, a galactic civilization based not on the conquest of the weak by the strong, but on the voluntary association of free beings committed to protecting each other. I had battled beside humans and experienced fear like never before. But I had also discovered courage, hope, and purpose that my logical frameworks could never have provided. The galaxy was changing, and for the first time in my existence, I was eager to see what would happen next. In the distance, new ships appeared, scouts reporting that another conquest-based empire was threatening neutral worlds. The alert klaxons began sounding as ships throughout the fleet prepared for another impossible battle against overwhelming odds. I felt my carapace vibrating with the old familiar frequency of fear. But now it was joined by something new, the harmonic resonance of beings who fought not because they were ordered to fight, but because they chose to fight for something greater than themselves. The human revolution was spreading throughout the galaxy, one impossible victory at a time. And I was proud to be part of it.